I think the NFO did an incredible job, and I'm so pleased with how it's turned out. Compared to the mock-up, I'm expecting especially the strings to sound so much better. Doing those fast runs. The piece I wrote was rapidly changing to suit the cartoon, and sometimes you may struggle a bit with sample libraries, but it doesn't beat live musicians.
Confirm your position.
We're in position, sir. Ready to proceed.
How's it been for you to sit here with the Northern Film Orchestra?
Yeah, it's incredible, and it's a really cool space as well. I've never been in Star Hall before, but in terms of just like a room for recording it sounds incredible. And also, I mean, what was it, a 32 piece?
32, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a full symphonic orchestra. It's great. It sounds incredible.
When I first came to approaching writing for this, it was a bit overwhelming. Thinking I went back to listen to Carl Stalling's stuff and thought, wow, this is going to be really hard. Just sort of took it very slowly and working out where I wanted to go structurally with the piece. The runners up come up and I see the names and I was kind of like, oh, great, but also like, oh, well, but, better luck next time. I didn't, I thought I gave it my best shot. And then Brian came on the screen and said, now to announce the winner. And the music played first, not my name. And instantly, obviously, because I've heard that piece so many times, I just, jumped up in the air and probably screamed quite a few profanities and woke up my son upstairs. But it was all good. Yeah, everyone was kind of happy in our household.
I know, I always think when we do orchestral sessions, it makes writing music seem easier. I don't know what you think. Because when you're writing, you're overthinking, you're like, is this going to be any good? Whereas you don't need to do that. You just need to trust that the musicians will make it good.
Yeah.
Like, you can have a melody with 3 notes in it, and the musicians will make it sound how it's meant to, you know what I mean? Yeah. So that's one thing I always think after a session. I just want to write music, and I want to not second guess myself, you know what I mean? Because it's like, the job of the composer is to make the music, it's not to decide whether it's good or not. You know what I mean? The listener decides whether they like it or not, I would say. That's really and I'd just say, trusted musicians, if you've got the budget to fund a live session, they're going to make your music better. And you don't need to overwrite your music, you know what I mean? You can just write it as it is and then trust the musicians will take it to the next kind of level.
I think the NFO did.
Hi, I'm Brian Waters from the Q-Tube. I'm joined by Brian and Stefan from Leeds Conservatoire and by Jack from Northern Film Orchestra. So essentially, we have this new film which is completely free to download. As you can see, it's a completely different film from anything that we've done before. And it's there for you for free with spotting sheets and all the audio assets and all the rest of it. And we're giving you a month, so from today until the 10th of February, to rescore and submit it for our competition. And the prize will be a performance and recording with Jack's Northern Film Orchestra. And we're doing a number of different things, including this session now, to try and help you along the way. The agenda really for this evening, and we're going to try and rattle through it as quickly as we can, is we're going to have a quick chat about the judging, and then we're going to go through the spotting sheet in some detail, because that will help you to understand what the expectations are and what the spotting sheet actually means, and perhaps some common pitfalls. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the masterclass that Brian and Stefan are going to do for us in a couple of weeks, well, just over a week's time. So apologies for the audio issues, nothing different. You're probably used to it by now. But Brian, you were instrumental, as it were, in getting Nicholas on board for this. So perhaps you could give those who are unfamiliar a quick intro into who Nicholas is, what sort of work he's done, and that type of thing.
Sure, yeah. I first met Nicholas about 10 to 15 years ago when I was writing books, when I write books on film music, which I still do. He got involved, and then he came to Leeds Conservatoire, where myself and Stefan work. Every year, or most years, he comes and does a couple of masterclasses and a couple of film nights for us. For those of you, anybody that doesn't know who Nicholas Daw is, he's basically an orchestrator, a very, very in-demand orchestrator who's done some top Hollywood films. I mean, in the distant past, films like Stargate, films like Independence Day. He was David Arnold's orchestrator when David Arnold wrote all the Bond music. So in the late 90s, stuff like Casino Royale and stuff like that. He was the orchestrator on those, which is, like I said before, which is why I thought of him to get him in as a judge for this. He's a very internationally renowned orchestrator. So yeah, that's Nicholas.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for organising that. I know that the members of the community are going to be really excited. So so there are actually kind of two prizes, really. One of which is that our top 10, so we'll do the shortlisting. I'm assuming we're going to get more than 10 entries. We'll be shortlisting the entries down to 10, and then those will go to our final panel, which will essentially be Jack, Brian, Stefan, and Nicholas Daw. And we will do a recorded discussion with that panel, going through those 10 entries and giving feedback and observations on those, and then whittling it down on the video to our final 3, and then announcing our winner. And all of that will be shared with the community. So you've got the opportunity not only to win a performance and recording by the orchestra, but also the opportunity to have your music listened to and sort of reviewed, as it were, by Nicholas Daw and the other members of the judging panel. So I think it's pretty cool. And of course, you've got a superb clip to play with and have that experience and have that as part of your portfolio. So without further ado, and feel free, guys, to interrupt if there's anything you want to sort of add as I waffle on. Shall we go into the spotting sheet?
Yeah, sure, let's do it.
Okay, let me just get that shared. Just a second. Right. Okay, can we see that?
Could you expand it a little bit, Brian? I think the text is quite small.
I can. Yes, we have the technology. Just a second. He says.
That's it.
Right.
Keep
So we don't really need to look at the first sort of 3 columns, do we? We need to look at the last 2 columns.
Yeah, the last
really.
one.
Yeah.
So is that good?
That's good. That's good. Yeah.
So basically, we've given each of the cues. There are about 12 cues or so, I think. Yeah, 16 cues. And by the way, the clip is really split into 2 parts. There's an action sequence with dialogue and everything. And then there's a title. It's like a classic title sequence for a James Bond type film. So that's almost 2 different tasks. So yeah, let's go through them. Brian, do you want to lead this actually? Because I mean, you're far better qualified than I am.
Yeah, I think. Well, me and Steph, I think, can comment quite a lot on this. The very first one says silence or very subtle and low in the mix, allowing the sound design to do its job. And that, I mean, I'll let Steph talk in a minute, but basically that, from my point of view, that's, I mean, all these are really key things is not to be afraid of silence, not to be afraid of writing music which is subtle and just sits in the background. Most of the stuff you're writing will, apart from the end, which is where Brian wants a really cracking kind of theme, most of it is actually classic underscore music. And anybody that comes to these monthly things that we've been doing for the last few months, where me and Stefan are giving feedback, will know that one of the regular things that comes up is that sometimes the music is a little bit too busy, and sometimes it ends up cutting across dialogue, it ends up blowing out dialogue, and it ends up just basically being a little bit too overcooked. And that's understandable, because composers want to compose music. That's what they do. And film music can be a quite frustrating domain to be in, because regularly you'll have to just tone it down. So all I would say on that one is just keep your eye on the throttle and don't overdo it. I don't know if you've got anything else on that one, Steph.
Yeah. So I mean, Brian's covered most of it. I think it's a really common problem. All of the sessions these monthly sessions that we do, but for QTube, we say this about the real tendency to score over the top of dialogue. I mean, it's a really natural thing. We talk to our students about it all the time, because composers want to compose music, but with film music, it's a different discipline, which you've got to let the film or the clip or the scene, whatever it is, you're sort of working on, whether it's got dialogue or whether it hasn't, is not to overpower it, and definitely to follow these suggestions that are in there. When I think about working with Nicholas Daw on film nights, there's a couple of times, and obviously Nicholas is very experienced, and he would say the same thing, is that when you just watch a clip and enjoy it, it means that the music's working. If you start to kind of notice the music overpowering, then obviously something's not quite right. So I think it's difficult for a composer to actually sort of take a step back. But I think that's the trick, is to watch the film and say, is the film working? Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, just before we go on to the second one, I mean, obviously what Steph said is right. And I remember some of the things that Nicholas used to say, whereas this was great music, but it's just too much. Anybody who gets into film score writing thinking it's all about writing the great themes, only a small part of it is that. Only maybe 10% of what you'll end up doing in your life involves writing big memorable themes. Most of it will be underscore music, and that's where you will earn your money, and that's where you will earn your reputation. That's where a director will come to you, not because he thinks you write great music, but because he or she or they think that you write music which works for the film. That's the most important thing. Brian, could you expand it again? It's gone small for some reason.
Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, God, it's because half of it was hanging off. Never mind.
Yeah. So we come to the next one, which basically says
it's probably worth bearing in mind that at this stage they haven't actually seen the film. So it starts basically with some dialogue. Basically, they're setting the scene. So that's what the first cue is. We basically introduce the main characters. So yeah, carry on.
Okay, so the next one where it says gradually add touches of innocuous underscore. That's what I'm talking about when I say innocuous underscore. You'll spend most of your life doing that. And it's one thing I had to get used to when I was doing TV in London, quite a few years ago, was just this idea that you, on the one hand, you have what you want to write and what you're dying to write and what you're trying to impress people with your knowledge of orchestration or whatever it might be, or abstract music or whatever. And then the director will say, well, this is all well and good, but, thing is, you're subservient to the film. Yeah. So when we see things like innocuous underscore, that really is a big deal. So
what typical things are sort of best avoided for innocuous underscoring?
Well, if there's a lot going on, in terms of dialogue or off-screen dialogue or what it might be, then you usually avoid melody like the plague. Slinging melody over somebody talking is the kiss of death. Generally speaking, it's very hard to do. So you would generally use harmony and chords, and you would possibly use softer textures if you were trying to be innocuous. You wouldn't be very innocuous if you had a screaming brass section, for example. So it's just stuff like that, light woodwind, a kind of chamber size string section playing gentle chords. That's the kind of thing which is when we say innocuous. It doesn't mean it has to be boring, by the way. Innocuous doesn't mean boring. Innocuous can still be scary. It can still be dramatic and all the rest of it. But it just means keeping out of the way and just essentially this. I mean, this will sound a bit trite, but knowing the place of music. And not overdoing it with music.
We've talked about piano before as well, haven't we, on these sessions? The same, be careful with piano as well, as particularly over dialogue. But I think the next two is sort of hits it for me. It's about mood. So I think about the tone of the clip. What's the tone? What's the mood of it? And to try and match that, quite often I do these sessions with our students about looking at the image, looking at the mood of the image, lighting, movement, where the camera's placed, how many people are in the frame, is it a close-up, all that kind of stuff to pick up a tone and a mood that you can then embed with your music into the scene.
I mean, when it says a bit later on, it says, like Steph said, the mood continues as before, but suggesting anticipation. Something is coming, something's about to happen. And again, that's normally something that you would articulate with a combination of harmony and texture. Okay, knowing what kind of sounds to use for something that was anticipatory, and knowing what kind of chords to use. I mean, you would never use a major or a minor chord, for example, for something which was meant to be anticipatory. You're much more likely to use a suspended chord. We could talk about what they are, which I suspect what most people know what they are anyway. But we could talk about that on the 19th when we meet up. It's different chords have got kind of different harmonic tropes, we often call them. Often are quite suggestive, and on the 19th I'll play some chords and describe them.
Excellent.
Steph, do you want to? Sorry,
I mean, again, same thing when it says. I mean, I would say to follow this spotting sheet as closely as possible. I mean, it's there. It's been worded in a way for you to definitely follow. So where it says mood, to specifically match that mood. When it says subtle, subtly approach this stuff. Pauses, and also where it says no music here. I think again to actually follow this. I mean, obviously, I think there's a bit of creativity to be expected, but I think one of the real temptations is to kind of just go for it. And I think part of it, and I'm sure when we come to the judging stage, is looking at the spotting sheet and looking at how the music's been executed in line with that. So I think for me is to absolutely really try and pinpoint as much of this as possible, and I think the guidance at the bottom for the general points as well are great, actually. I think that's another really important point to look at.
I mean, following a spotting sheet, I mean, normally spotting will happen usually traditionally in person. You'll be in a room with maybe not even the director, it'll definitely be the editor, and definitely the music editor, the music designer and people like that, sat in a room basically looking at where the director wants music, discussing what kind of music, and really, I mean, the success of your music will be determined by how well you interpret the director's wishes. Because don't forget, the composer sat there, and the composer's got to basically translate all these things into musical language. I was just talking to some students recently, and I was reflecting on the fact that although we call it music, right? Obviously, that's our life. Most people, when they listen to music, aren't listening in a musically critical way, and they're not listening in a musically literate way. For most people, music communicates emotionally. So when you finish your music, I mean, then basically ask yourself, is it being an emotional benefit to the film? because nobody will be sat in the theatre thinking, well, that's a great E minor 9 chord, that's a great G minor 7 chord, well done. They'll be basically sat there thinking, how does this make me feel? So it's music to you, it's music to the people behind the stands in the orchestra, but to the director and to most of the audience and the editor and the sound designer, it's basically emotion. And you have to really get on top of that. Sorry, Steph.
Yeah, no, that's what from a directing perspective, it's exactly what Brian says, is that they'll consider the music to be film language. So the director's looking at this in film language, and that includes the music. So there's an understanding of film language, when, as Brian says, and for musicians, it's the emotion. So how much of the emotion is embedded in the script, in the clip, in the editing, in the cinematography, the acting, and then of course the music. And we say, we always say this in these sessions that we do on a monthly basis about the composer's the filmmaker, and that's how you definitely should approach this. I mean, you're looking at the general points. Dialogue is king. Don't overcompose. Don't be afraid to have silence when required. All these things,
Yeah, these
absolutely.
Just so everybody knows what you're referring to, because they're not visible at the moment, those are further down on the spotting sheet. There's a bunch of general notes, which is what Stefan was just referring to. And each of these cues that you're seeing on screen is mapped to time code points. And in the pack that you download, there is a version of the film with the time code embedded in it. So you can actually match this to the various points in the film.
And when you're writing the music, this is not an easy task, right? This is quite a demanding spotting sheet, and it's quite precise. So a lot of the skill will be your interpretive skills, and not just your musical skills. And even when you're talking about your musical skills, it's like, what emotion do you generate? Nobody cares what key it's in. People care about how it makes them feel. If you're wanting to go from heavy music to light music, if you're wanting to, there's suddenly some dialogue and you're wanting to bring it down, try and make that drop in volume a product of the arrangement and the production. Don't just duck it. I presume people know what I mean when I say ducking, but for anybody that doesn't, ducking is where you sometimes automate it, or you manually just suddenly drop the sound of the music. And there's nothing worse than ducking, basically, because it just sounds very false and contrived. If you want the music to suddenly get lower, then you put that into the orchestration, and you go from a big orchestra right down to a string section. Try and make it as natural as possible.
Excellent, thank you. I'm conscious of the fact that, Jack, I think you've got to go to another meeting or something. Did you want to quickly say anything?
I don't mind hanging on for a few minutes just to cover the stuff we were going to.
Okay, great.
In terms of the spotting stuff, everything the guys were saying makes sense, and definitely with Underscore. I think that was a big one on score relief, people trying to be a bit too epic.
Yeah.
They think, it's a competition, so I have to throw a kitchen sink at it.
Yeah.
But again, it's just following the story.
And you see the list of all those instruments, and you probably think you've got to use them all the time and that type of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's good to have the spotting sheet kind of as a recipe to guide them, kind of thing.
Okay, great. Do you want to go through any more specific of those points, Brian and Stefan?
All I was going to say, which wasn't actually on the spotting sheet, but something we mentioned last week when we were talking, was obviously you guys will be using samples at this stage anyway. And when you're trying to mock up an orchestra, you're trying to replicate an orchestra, it sounds like an obvious thing to say, but listen to the real thing. Listen to real orchestras. Listen to as many examples of orchestral music as you can find, whether it's film music or concert music. And if you want to know what a solo French horn sounds like, definitely listen to one. I've had so many experiences where people have brought me something and said, I'm sorry about the French horn. It's a really crap sample. And my answer to that would be, well, just don't use it then. If it's a bad sample, use something else. Use something where you've got a decent sample. Or ultimately, right within your means. Don't try and dazzle people by using loads of samples that are a little bit below par. Work within your means, and definitely listen to what that instrument really sounds like. What does a trombone section that kind of classic James Bond rasping, biting trombone section that you sometimes hear. How's that? What does that really sound like? How well does it map across to your samples? And how much can you do with your samples to actually make it work? Some of this we're going to be talking about when we meet you on the 19th.
Yeah.
So I'm probably jumping the gun a little bit, but yeah, we'll talk more about that on the 19th.
Just going a bit deeper on that point. You can actually listen specifically to Northern Film Orchestra when you're doing that part of it as well. If you go on our website, we've got a playlist on Spotify of loads of the stuff that we've played on. So yeah, if you're doing your research and listening to orchestra stuff, you can go away and listen to our specific orchestra, which might be helpful as it's the one for the prize winning recording.
One question in the chat. I don't know, Brian, Stefan, whether you want to briefly try and cover this or wait until the 19th. But somebody asked, why is there a cue that says no music?
That bass. Obviously, I didn't direct the film. That's probably one. That's probably one for the director, really. But I would imagine that when it says no music, that's deliberate because they simply don't want you to score that bit.
Yeah, that's fairly common, right, in film. That's
the thing is for me that with looking at it from a directing perspective and put my director's hat on, is that the director has the film in their head. They know what they want, and so a spotting sheet will be that interpretation. So for the director, they've got that mapped out. So if it comes to that section where it says no music here, that's specifically because that's why the director envisions it. As Brian said earlier, in reality, you're likely to either be with the director or in a spotting session, or it's definitely with the editor, and the editor will have strict instructions to say and will know where things go. But for the purposes of this, it's handed over to you via a spotting sheet, and that's how they see it, is to sort of say, well, for that section, it's to be left blank.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to go through any other more points on the sheet itself, or shall we leave everything more until the 19th?
We can leave most of it to the 19th if you want, but just to follow up on the production stuff, Brian's covered it really for now, is just to be careful, because as Brian says, if you haven't got that sample, then don't sort of think, oh well, it's going to sound okay when it's orchestrated, or it's been recorded properly or whatever, because the chances are that people can't sort of see beyond that.
Yeah. I
think once upon a time that's how it used to be. You can sort of say, well, imagine how it's going to be when it's finished, and people go, yeah, it'll be great. With way technology is, you can get good stuff. So don't rely on it.
And it isn't also, it's people often think it's about money and it's about getting the best libraries and stuff, and honestly, really, it's not all about that. It is a little bit, obviously. You do need to get some decent libraries, but it's not all about that. It's about how you use them, and it's about what I call the arranger within. Every composer hopefully has an arranger living inside their head, and it's the arranger that will basically advise you in terms of how many instruments do you want, what kind of note, what kind of groupings do you want, and stuff like that, and just be realistic about that. Just be realistic and only go creating sounds where you can know in an authoritative sense what that sound is supposed to sound like. So if you've got a load of samples that aren't they're very good, you can orchestrate your way out of those problems. When I first started writing music for TV, which was far too many years ago, there were no samples, and I had a Roland D50, a Roland D70, and a Korg M3R. And you would laugh at that gear now. And I used to get people saying, these sound almost real, which is ridiculous. And the reason for that was because I'm an arranger. I kind of knew what the tolerance level of strings and brass and stuff like that was. So the best thing you could do, obviously it's a tough ask within the next 2 weeks, but generally the best thing you can do yourself is learn how to orchestrate. Honestly, that is the most valuable thing you could ever do. And that will help you write music. Every decent film composer has an orchestrator living inside their head. And there's no better advice than just listen to the real sounds and then figure out how to make your sounds sound as real as they can. And that won't be just about the technology. It'll be about little things like if you had a string section, let's just use a couple of really quick things. If you had a string section and you went and you put all 10 fingers on the keyboard, you could have the best string sample in the world and it would sound rubbish, because you'll never find 10-part voicing in string sections. You'll find 4 or 5, maybe 6 or 7, an absolute push. Mostly it's 3 or 4 or 5-part voicing. So as soon as you go and put all 10 fingers, you might as well put your toes on the keyboard as well, because it's just sonic overkill. So you can have the best sample library in the world, but unless you follow that basic thing, I had a student recently who wrote for Vibes, and they were like basically 7 or 8 notes for Vibes at the same time. And I said, look, a Vibe player has got 2 sticks in each hand. They're only going to produce 4 notes at once maximum. So if you write 8 for them, straight away you've lost the authenticity. So it's stuff like that, and we will go through a lot of this on the 19th. I think will be a good idea. Yeah,
people are really interested in this. I mean, the chat is quite active. People are expressing their interest and their sort of concerns and their eagerness to learn more. So yeah, this is all good stuff, really.
Good stuff.
Thank you, chaps. I think that's probably enough. So the spotting sheet is there. If you've got any questions on it, of course, get in touch. You can either contact via the website, you can leave comments on this video, or you can join us on the masterclass on the 19th and speak to us in the live chat. So there's lots of ways to interact with us and sort of get any pointers that you want. But I think that's it, really. Yeah, I mean, we've introduced.
You don't want to talk about the 19th, or have we done that enough?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. What's the basic synopsis of what we're going to do on the 19th?
Sorry, on the 19th, me and Steph are basically going to spend an hour or whatever talking about some of the things we've already mentioned, about orchestration, about voicing, about how you get that sound. Would it be all right for me to share my screen for like 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Do I have the facility to do that?
Let me authorize that. 1 second. You should be able to do it now.
Oh, okay. Let's have a look. So if I go share, hang on, share sound, and there you go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I'm not going to bore you senseless for 5 minutes, but this is just a little bit of a guide about the one on the 19th, which obviously is geared towards the James Bond sound, because that's what Brian's basically got in store for you with this film. So I did this little session quite a while ago called For Your Ears Only, which it just meant to talk a little bit about James Bond. We talked about the real James Bond really was the music. That was the main thing that was responsible for James Bond's character. And the legacy of that is essentially a guy called John Barry. And then we're going to talk about why is the music from the James Bond's films so recognizable? What is it about it? And often knowing what it is about a sound that makes it distinctive is half the battle in replicating it. So to understand the music, we need to understand and categorize its components. So we'll be talking about harmony, arrangement, texture, instrumentation, rhythm, something we call harmonic tropes. And that is a certain bunch of chords that are absolutely universally used in thrillers and particularly Bond films. And also textural tropes, like, for example, when you hear a lot of the Bond music, it's a certain size orchestra. It's flooded with reverb. It's produced in that way, in that kind of 60s, 70s way. Also, we're going to look at how do we create mood, and how do we end up with people saying that the music sounds clandestine, furtive, and surreptitious. And there are 3 words which have all been said to me by students about what James Bond music is. And in fact, once we had this famous event at an open day where a student, I played some music, I played a chord, and I said, what does that mean to everybody? And all the students said, James Bond. And there was this young girl on the front row, Asian student, basically said, who's James Bond? And she didn't know who James Bond was. So I said, okay, well, let's go with that. What does the music remind you of? And she said she thought it was furtive. and surreptitious. And I think that's just the power of music. I was stunned by that. So, we'll talk a little bit about that. Just a little bit about the composers for James Bond and the most recent one, obviously, Hans. And just to finish off, just right now, anyway, the guy we were talking about, Nicholas Daw, that's Nicholas Daw there on the right. And what he does is he tours the country and the world conducting the James Bond music, the live to picture and stuff like that. And that David Arnold sometimes comes with him. And they're the two there. So that's Nicholas Daw, the orchestration. That's the guy that he did a lot of Bond scores with. So that was just basically a quick guide. Obviously, that's not including what Steph's going to do, what Steph's going to talk about. Steph, I don't know if you want
to... yeah, well, I think one of the things, I mean, to build on what you've pointed out, is that obviously James Bond franchises has moved forward a lot, but in some ways I think people still hark back musically to the old James Bond in some way, not always, but I think quite more. I think the characters developed, but I think one of the things of its identity is absolutely that music. So we can definitely look at that and look at James Bond in a contemporary sense. And then, of course, its origins as well of the character, and how the characters developed, and the kind of things to look out for.
Can you guys? Sorry, Brian, just 1 second. Can you guys hear this? Sorry. Can you hear this? So there's your classic James Bond chord, and that can be explained in literally 5 minutes. I'm not suggesting you fill this full of those chords, but there's a lot of things like that where essentially you've got that chord and everyone goes James Bond, and that's the beauty of these scores, because they manage to create something which starts its life as a music, as an E minor chord, A minor 9 chord with a major 7th, and ends up becoming an emotion in an audience. So yeah, I'll do a little bit of that when we meet on the 29th. The 19th. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. All right, guys. Anything else you want to add, Jack, or anybody, before we close?
No, I think that's all good. Not too much else from me, other than if anyone has any orchestra-related questions, obviously they can fire away. Give us an email if they wanted any specific things answered.
Yeah.
And just looking forward to seeing what people come up with.
Yeah, me too.
Fantastic. I mean, regarding the orchestra, so there's full details in the pack about the configuration of the orchestra. There's also a kind of reworked guide to the orchestra, which Jack did for Score Relief, and we've rejigged it for this competition. So there's quite a lot of tips and techniques in there for writing for orchestra. And also, I think, Jack, we did 1 or 2 live streams which should be on our channel previously, didn't we, talking about the orchestra as well. So there's lots of information there for people to get to grips with about NFO specifically, about orchestras in general, and then of course we've got this wonderful masterclass in 9 days' time.
I think one thing that Nicholas is interested to do is that when we're on that final thing, when we're talking about the last few, and we're basically putting them in an order, if you like, and saying who's come first or whatever, that Nicholas was saying that he would be interested in, if there was time, in talking to that person about orchestration considerations. Now, I don't know whether he's talking about on the day, or whether he's talking about maybe offering half an hour's time with that student, talking specifically about their work and looking at what they've done and saying, right, those strings you've got there, a really good way of doing X, Y, Z is to do this. So that could be interesting.
Yeah,
that sounds cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just replying to some of the comments. Somebody asking when we're doing the second part of our live feedback on the Cosmos Laundromat and Tears of Steel thing. So,
when is that?
I don't know. We'll announce it.
Right. Okay.
We'll probably do it. We'll probably do it as our early February live stream that we usually do. Okay. We usually do one at the beginning of each month, so we'll probably do it then. But we'll announce everything soon. Don't worry. It's not forgotten. And of course, we'll be doing the giveaway from Fracture Sounds on that as well. So yeah, so good luck everyone. I hope all the instructions and everything are clear, but basically go to the website, you can grab everything you need for free, and then just create your music, upload your video, and go through the instructions for submitting your entry to the competition. And we're really excited to hear what you come up with. So thank you, Brian, Stefan and Jack,
No
for
worries.
coming this evening.
No problem.
No worries.
And good luck to everyone that's taking part in the competition. And see you on the 19th.
See you
Thank
soon.
you.